I was in a coma, and to the rest of the world, I was just in that bed. But to myself, I was in this place, a place that I've come to call the place between here and there. I reviewed my life, and I went through everything. And when I was done with my life review, my awareness was raised. And this went on, over and over again, closer to 1,000,000 times than it was to one. And what I began to understand is that perhaps part of you is always in spirit.
Still have questions? Well, join me live for Wake Up Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Mountain, 7 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Eastern. I'll answer your questions, and you might see a familiar face. Together, we're waking up the collective. Thank you for watching. My guest today is Stephen Weber, who had a near-death experience as a result of a motorcycle accident. So, Steve, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's just an honor, and I appreciate you taking out the time to talk to me.
Oh, I love this. It's the best part of my day.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, it's going to be good. We talked a little bit before. We're going to cover a couple things because I've been familiar with Steve's story for a very long time because we were on Jeff Maher's podcast about the same time many years ago. And since then, he has been able to make some really cool connections of things from his past that have happened that are connected to his NDE. So I think I want to start there because the NDE is obviously the precipice for all of your understanding. So I'm going to let you share your NDE in whatever way you would like to share it with us.
Sure, I'll be glad to. I guess this whole thing started, I guess, back in 2005. Been riding Harleys all my life since I was a little kid. There was an empty field next to my house. I had a paper route. I bought a Harley 90. And ever since then, up until just a few years ago, I drove every day, rain, hail, or sleet, or snow. It really was a passion of mine. I lived in my hometown where I grew up, and I really enjoyed riding. In fact, my neighbors would complain all the time about my loud motorcycle. They actually elected representatives to talk to me one day. And so I brought my guitar, some beers, and we had a good time, and we found a way to make things okay. And that was the way my life went for a long time. And then one evening, I was driving home. It was 4th of July. I'd been to the fireworks display over at Fire Island on Long Island, and with a few of my Harley friends. And then I was on my way home all by myself. I was minding my own business. And as I'm just putting down the Meadowbrook Parkway going northbound, I look over to my left and I saw a gentleman driving a pickup truck, but something didn't look right. I couldn't figure it out. And then I realized that gentleman was going the wrong way. He was going northbound in the southbound lane. And I just looked around, and I was just trying to figure out what was going on. Like I wasn't expecting this. And this was very late at night. This was like midnight, 1 a.m., even later. It was very late. It was after all the fireworks had gone on. And it was like, I thought it was a construction vehicle or because there was construction going on. I really didn't understand what was going on. And then the next thing as I know is that the guardrail that was separating us disappeared. And so what I did is I quickly moved over 3 lanes. And as soon as I did that, the gentleman went under a bridge and head on crashed into a limousine. And he killed a little girl, and he killed a limo driver. And when I got to the scene, there was car parts all over the place. And as a motorcyclist, I really can't be around an accident scene. And there were people immediate on scene because everyone's coming home from the fireworks and such. And so I went home, and that was it for me. The next day, in fact, I called up my friend that night, one of my Harley buddies. I told him what had happened. He told me to go to sleep and get some rest, which I did. And then in the morning, he called me up and he said, it's in the newspaper. And he said, they're looking for witnesses. And I thought to myself, I didn't want to come forward because it was, all the things were apparent. The guy was driving the wrong way. Already there was allegations that the gentleman had been drinking. And it seemed like shutting closed case to me. And I had my own computer business with my brother. And the last thing I wanted to do was take off time for what I thought was an open and shut case. And that was it for a while. But I tell you, it really ate at me for a long time because I had just a few precious seconds to talk to warn the fellow. And I spent all those few seconds thinking like, am I seeing what I'm seeing? Like I was just, I don't know, you just don't expect it. And I felt terrible about that because it couldn't have turned out any worse. I mean, a little girl was dead, a limo driver, and they were coming home from a wedding. They did everything right. And I just felt terrible about it. And it was actually the first things I thought about every morning that I woke up, and the last thing before I went to sleep at night. It was just eating at me. And then about a year later, my buddy calls me up again and he said, Steve, you got to look at the paper. And I never read the local paper. You know, I was involved in like politics and things, but big world things, not local stuff. I didn't watch the local channels. It just wasn't my life. And so I opened up the paper, and on the front page, there was a trial going on for this fellow. And they were charging him with second-degree homicide, not vehicular homicide, just second-degree murder. That's what they were charging him with. And they were looking for witnesses. And this seemed very serious to me. I mean, serious before, but the gravity of what had happened was really starting to hit on me. And I still wasn't sure I wanted to come forward. And I spoke to my children, and I had a daughter at the time that was the very same age as that young lady who had passed. And you know, it's funny how kids like will repeat back to you the things that you've said to them. And she told me to be brave. And so that's what I did. I called up the DA, and they came down to my house like an hour later. They came down right away. They took my statements and such. And the prosecutor told me, absolutely, she's going to put me on the stand. And so that was it. Prior to going to the stand, I had a police officer friend who was testified many times. And so I worked with him, just making sure that I wouldn't fall into many of the traps that attorneys can set you in. And he gave me some really good advice. And so I was very prepared for that trial. And so I was on the stand for 2 days. And I'm a very animated person. And the attorney really couldn't get anywhere with me because I was in business with my brother, and we chewed on each other every day. You know, I was an engineer, but I also did a lot of sales because it was our business. So I was very aware of the way that people could manipulate you, and he just couldn't do that with me. And I felt like I gave good testimony. I mean, I really did. And but I had mixed feelings about it because he was just a kid. The defendant was just a kid who made a terrible mistake that he couldn't take back. And for the grace of God, it wasn't me. You know, I was no angel, but you know, I felt for the family, and I was just going to bear witness to what I saw. And that's what I did. And the attorney really beat on me for a couple of days, but I felt good about it. And they wound up convicting that young man, and they sentenced him to 16 years in prison. And like I said, I had mixed feelings about it. And the family was devastated, but they were angry. I mean, they were very, very angry. And I understood that because I had young children, but they were angry at the judge. They felt, I mean, there was no way that they were going to be okay with this. And I understood that. And I felt really bad because I saw how it ruined their family. I mean, it really did. And I was heartbroken for them, but I also felt for the defendant. But that's what happened. And it completely changed my life. I left my business with my brother, and I decided to become a full-time dad. I wasn't going to let those moments slip away from me. I saw what had happened to that family. And so I did some computer consulting from my home, enough to pay the bills, but that was it. And I just went full in to be a full-time dad. And I took the kids to all music lessons. I was actually elected to the school board. I was so committed to my local community now. I started organizations. I lived in Kings Park. I started this organization called the Kings Park Network, another organization, Angels Without Faces, that provided emergency relief to families in need. And it was really what I was into. It was my life, and I wasn't gonna miss out on this. And then one afternoon, it was in the springtime, it was a Sunday. I took a drive out east on my Harley Davidson to the Hamptons. And that's like see all the movie stars there, but I didn't go there for that. There was a barbecue place that I really liked. It was a little hole in the wall place that you would never, never, ever make notice of. But if you knew where it was great. And so I went there, I putted out there, I had some barbecue. It was great. I've done this so many times before. And it was in the springtime, so there wasn't a lot of traffic around because it could get really crazy in the summer. And so I was riding back on my Harley, just putting along. And then all of a sudden, the traffic was like backed up for miles all of a sudden. And this was uncommon for this type of year. There must have been like an accident or something going on that caused this traffic. And my Harley Davidson was just so big and it was so heavy. In fact, I had just bought a new Harley. All my Harleys were really loud, but this was like a couch running down Main Street. It was so comfortable. It had a beautiful stereo in it. It was great, but it was still so heavy. And so I saw people were like going up to the intersection and making a right-hand turn to find another way to get out of this. So they were riding on the shoulder of the road. And excuse me, I just need to take a drink. And so they were riding on the shoulder of the road to make that right-hand turn. And after about a half hour, I decided to do the same thing. And just as I got to the intersection, I was about to make a right-hand turn. On the opposite side, they opened up a little bit of space, and a gentleman in a SUV made a left-hand turn and hit the gas pretty hard to get through there, not to hold things up. And he crashed right into the side of me. And then for me, like, the lights went out. And next things I knew, I was laying on the ground and I was looking up, and there were a whole load of emergency vehicles around and people standing over me. And I saw that the light had dimmed, like it was nighttime now, almost night. It was twilight. So a lot of time must have passed. And I wanted to get up. Like, driving dirt bikes all my life is like, if you go down, you better get up or else you're going to stay down. I know that sounds silly, but that's just kind of the way that I thought at that time. And so all I wanted to do was get up, and I felt like my leg wasn't attached. The skin was still there, but my leg was just dangling, and I felt this intense pain. And then the lights went out again. Next thing I remember is I was floating through the air, and I was going up through the clouds, and I was going higher and higher and higher. And just about then, I started coming down from the clouds. And then I looked down and I saw on the ground a big H with a circle in it. And I realized I was actually outside a helicopter laying on some sort of pontoons, and I was being airlifted to what I immediately recognized was Stony Brook Hospital, one of the premier trauma centers in the United States. It was a university hospital. My mother graduated from there. I graduated from there. My daughter graduated from there. And I was very familiar with it. And I remember thinking when I was landing that, wow, I'm not getting up and going home from this. My life is going to be forever changed. And that's the last thing I remember on being in the here and now for what was about a month, but in my mind, in myself, it was lifetimes. I was so seriously injured. My whole left side was crushed. I had a compound fracture in my leg. I had a traumatic brain injury. I had a broken arm. My back was broken, and I had internal bleeding. And so they had to do several surgeries to stabilize me because they just couldn't find out where the bleeding was. But eventually they got control of it. And there I was in my hospital bed. I was unconscious. I was in a coma. And to the rest of the world, I was just in that bed. But to myself, I was in this place, a place that I've come to call the place between here and there. I don't think it's like where you go when you pass, but I think it's like an in-between place that helps you understand what your life was about and to prepare you for going into spirit. That's at least that's what I believe it was. And at first, I didn't know that anything was different. It seemed very, very placed in my regular life. I was in a work-like setting, and but there was some things that I later understood to be different. Like first off, his time wasn't like time is here. It's like things didn't happen. Like you didn't, the sun didn't rise or fall, or you didn't have appointments in the future. It was that nothing happened unless you were learning, because that as you learn, you could see the process by which you learned where you were way back when. You could see all the things that had happened. So it made it feel like time was passing. And that was that was a main part of it. And the second part of it is I felt like I was learning. I was giving all that I knew up to the universe, God, and I was receiving wisdom down. Some of it was just grace, but other wisdom I was receiving from the experiences I was experiencing. I couldn't say what I was going to do, and I felt no hand, or I didn't see Jesus or anything like that. But what I saw and what I felt was that I was brought to these situations, and I would have to deal with those situations, and I'd have to learn from them. And I couldn't say what situation was going to happen or when I was to leave, but it seemed like as I learned all I could from the situation, a new situation would be presented. And so, but like I said, it wasn't someone saying, "Oh, wow, now Steve, you've learned and you could go on to the next step." It wasn't like that. It just happened. And so the first thing I was experienced is that I was in a work-like setting, and I saw this gentleman who I knew years ago, and he was inconsequential in my life. He was just another client. I liked him. He was funny, and he paid his bills. But he was kind of animated. He was from Haiti, and he spoke kind of English and French and some Creole thing, and he had to act out some things, as he said. I mean, I'm sure we've all met people like them. He's very animated and such. And I saw him in this work-like setting, and he was exactly the way I remember him, although 20 years had passed. And I was like, "Hello," I was greeting him, and that was it. I really didn't think anything of it. I still didn't know I was anywhere else. Just I was just going along with things. And then I saw him again, and he had like aged like 50 years, and he was an old man. And I recognized him because he kind of looked like him, but it was his mannerisms and the way that he talked that I was like, "Hey, you're so and so." And he would say, "Yeah, how'd you know?" And that went on for a while. He started to appear to me over a period of time in all different ways. That sometimes he was a young person, sometimes he was a male, sometimes he was a female, sometimes he was a Asian person, other times he was a Hispanic person. He just tried to trick me in all different ways. But what started to happen was that I didn't have to look for clues after a while. Very slowly, it started to come on that I began to sense him. I began to sense his energy. At first, it was mostly his mannerisms, but just a little bit of his energy. But as time went on, I got better and better at it. And it was like he was teaching me in his own way how to sense the energy in people and things. And it went very slow in the beginning, kind of like what I was saying about time. Is when I wasn't getting it, everything went very slow. But once I got it, everything went fast. And all of a sudden, everything changed. It was that now I could look back at things and I could feel the energy, not only in people, but in everything, in the plants, in the animals, the universe, the planets. I felt this energy in everything. Everything had its own unique energy, but everything had a very common energy that was the same for everybody. It was like we all shared this life force, but each one of us had our own personal experience within that life force. And that's was a monumental thing for me, because that I began to realize a couple of things. First off, is that whether you believe in the Big Bang or let there be light, they both explain the very same thing, is that we're all created from one, from almost nothingness into everything we could see and feel. That if you take a rock and put it out in space and put perhaps the correct circumstances, come back 40 billion years and there'll be life there. And people who only believe in science think that, well, that's proof of science. Yes, it is, but it's also proof of life, of spirit, because no matter where you are, spirit will find a way. I thought about like being a Catholic person, in Catholic school, they'd always say that God and Jesus was everywhere. And I never knew what that meant. But this really put into perspective for me, because that it is the energy. It is the energy which we all share. And it was then I came to the realization, and this is just my realization. Now, you could have a different thing and I could be wrong. But what I began to understand, that perhaps the creator and the creation are one, that we're not two, that everything you see, that we are the body, the spirit, everything of the creator. And as we learn and grow, perhaps the creation and the creator learns and grows. And that's what I began to understand in that first place. And so after I came to those types of realizations, all of a sudden everything stopped. Everything stopped. And I was presented with a new situation. It's not anyone said bye-bye, Stephen, or anything like that. It was just like, it was almost like a play, like the stage was set and I had free will within that setting, but I couldn't like go anywhere. It's not like I went to sleep or woke up or ate or went to the bathroom or planned things in the future. I just went from these situations, one situation to another situation. And the next thing I found myself was in what I've later learned that many people experience is a life review. Like you ever hear someone say, oh, my life flashed before my eyes. Well, it's very similar to that. But what happened is I reviewed my life and I went through everything. And it wasn't like I was like the Christmas Carol, the ghost of Christmas, where I walked around and saw it. It was like I was everywhere. It wasn't like I saw everything in every situation that I was in, but I also, now I could feel energy, is that I understood what everyone else was feeling at the time too. And so everything took on a whole different meaning because I saw it from so many different perspectives. And I realized everyone has a physical reason and a spiritual reason for experiencing these situations to learn and grow from. And so what would happen is once I would finish my life review, my awareness would be raised and my perceptions would be raised. And then I'd go and I'd review my life again. And now with this increased awareness, I saw more and more things in my life review. And when I was done with my life review, my awareness was raised. And this went on over and over again, closer to 1,000,000 times than it was to one. And what I began to realize is some of the most difficult things in my life, some of the most heartbreaking things. It's not that I had a terrible life, but some of the most difficult things in my life were the things that brought me the most bliss in that place. Because as I started to resolve these things, I started to feel like a weight is lifted from me. I didn't experience the block. I mean, I did experience them, but because I did them over and over again, the blockages didn't stop me. Eventually, I would work through those. Like blockages are things like shame or regret or embarrassment. Those things like stop you from really getting to the truth. When you're willing to accept those things, I began to learn and I began to understand why things happened the way that they did. And like sometimes people, when they have these experiences, they say, oh, everything's beautiful. I saw beautiful flowers and trees and everything was beautiful. I didn't see that. But what was beautiful to me was as I got this weight lifted from me, I no longer felt shame or regret or hatred or animosity towards anybody. It was like everything was gone and all I felt was bliss. And I knew when I would start my life review, it would be a tough day. It really would. And I'd experience lots of pain and suffering. But once I was done with it, I would feel bliss. And that was really the key, because that and I like bliss. I really do. And it just drove me. I just had a zeal to really, really, really get through this life review and learn as much as I could. And it was really important because the life review is so critical, because that even in my regular life, that's one of the lessons that I learned is, like, for instance, if you're bit from a dog and as a kid and you never review it in your life, you could be afraid of dogs all your life and you may never get past that, as opposed to when you go back and visit it with the wisdom that you have now, not when it occurred, you may begin to realize that you could tell the difference between an aggressive dog and a dog who's just happy to see you, and then you can make those understandings. Then you won't be afraid of dogs anymore. And that's the way those experiences were for me, because a lot of the aberrations that I've had and everyone else have occur when the situation occurs. But having to be able to go back and look it over again with the wisdom that you've gained over the years, and in that situation, it was the wisdom I gained from my life review, is that things take on a whole new meaning. And that was monumental to me, and that's what helps me to this day, because that even in my regular life now, if I look back to myself 6 months ago and think and not be able to say what a jerk I was then, it means I'm not growing and I'm not honestly looking at myself. In fact, when I find myself doing something wrong, I almost get excited. I do get excited about it because I know I could overcome this. It gives me a whole different outlook towards life. And then when that was done, I learned what I had to learn. I found myself in this other situation, is that I later believe it was a test, but what happened is that I was put in charge of these young adults, these kids, these teenagers, and I had to teach them a task. And no matter what I did, they wouldn't listen to me. They would pretend they listened to me, and they would say, "Oh yeah, we're all ready," and I would say, "Okay, let's go," and they would go, and then they would scatter, and I wouldn't see them for a long time. And then they'd come back and I'd be like, "What happened to you?" And they wouldn't know anything. They'd be like, "Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay, go ahead, tell us." And no matter what I did, I couldn't get these kids to pay attention. They would act like they're paying attention, but they would go off and they would scatter. And I just couldn't figure out what was going on. And finally, when I was at my wit's end, I approached a gentleman who was there, and it wasn't that you talk to people, is that it made it known that you wanted something answered, like you had something that was troubling you or a question. And so I stood before this gentleman and I wanted to know what's going on, like, what am I doing wrong? And then I looked at this gentleman and I saw his aura. I saw this energy and I felt this energy around him. And I couldn't tell what experiences he had in life, but I could see the wisdom that he's learned and has come through lots of experiences, and he feels good about it. And it was then I realized that I was standing before myself, not Stevie Weber, like here and now, but perhaps I believe my higher self. And I began to understand certain things. One of the things, as I began to understand, is that these kids, I'm not there to teach them a task, that they were spirits who were now going to have their first human incarnation. And I was there to shepherd them through that first human incarnation. And instead of shepherding them, all I saw, and I was taught all these things, how to read and feel energy. I was taught the wisdom of the universe and all these other things, but I didn't see that in the kids. All I saw was dopey kids. And I missed it. I missed everything, what I was supposed to do. And then I began to understand things. Is that it's not like my higher self told me something, but I felt this grace that enabled me to see things in a different light and discover them for myself. And what I began to realize is perhaps our spirits were created with the universe, and that we live through many incarnations, not just a physical person incarnation, many different incarnations. And we learn and grow. And as our spirit develops, the spirit of the universe develops even more. And that when it's time, when we've learned enough, we've learned about love and caring and trials and tribulations and how to overcome things, that we are granted human incarnation, which could be our very final step. Maybe just once or maybe 100 times, I don't know, but it's really that perhaps part of you is always in spirit, and then part of you experiences a human incarnation. And the reason why I believe is that your higher self couldn't make the mistakes that you make as a person in the physical world. You have your, perhaps you have your intuition, which is the wisdom you've learned from your experience through many different lifetimes and many different physical incarnations, and that's perhaps your intuition. But you're here and you experience physical life and make mistakes. In fact, if I didn't have a physical life and made mistakes, I would have nothing to review my life, and I wouldn't have gained any of this knowledge. And that's what I began to understand, is that perhaps part of you is always in spirit, and you're here to learn and grow and experience things. Now, I'm sure it's okay for people to go and sit on a mountain, go home all day and not experience anything. I mean, I don't know, but if there's one bit of advice I could give people, is to experience life, to live and learn, to laugh and to cry, to feel shame and regret and be able to overcome it, all these things, because without having those experiences, I wouldn't have gained the wisdom which I cherish so much. And once I began to understand with the kids, is that I was able to shepherd them through, and I was able to understand. And it wasn't like I spoke to them all of a sudden the same way that my higher self approached. I felt that grace. That's what I was projecting to the kids now, is I was projecting the grace of what I have learned. And I believe they had the same experience, is that they couldn't tell what I had lived through, but by being in my grace, it gave them the wisdom to take this next step into a human incarnation. But everything had a purpose there. But one thing seemed out of place to me. There was a lady there, and all she was doing was praying. And she didn't interact with anybody. She didn't interact with me, but all I felt was her prayers. And it wasn't like I heard the words. It was that the prayer was almost like a road under which this energy traveled. And it was this energy of love and light and encouragement and peace. I don't know how to explain it, but at times when I was in that situation, is that's all that kept me going. Like I was really frustrated at this time, and feeling those prayers helped me. And once again, as I couldn't hear the words, but I felt the energy, and perhaps those prayers was an energy, was a road under which this energy traveled. And then the very next part that I experienced is I was sitting at the bluff in Kings Park, my hometown. And it's this big cliff that overlooks the Long Island Sound. And I was sitting there with two of my friends, great friends of mine. John, he was a great guy. He would be like the voice of God in church. Like he would do the readings and he would say, "And Jesus said," and the whole place would shake. And he was really a good guy. And he really suffered with diabetes, and he had all these infections in his legs he was always battling with. And but he kept a good attitude towards things, and he really just did enjoy things and life, and he enjoyed the church and just everything to do with it. He was a great guy, and I enjoyed talking to him. And then Johnny, he was that was John. And Joe, he was this Irish guy who talked with the brogue, and he could tell a tale. He was so funny. I really enjoyed, and I would listen to him. So he'd always approach me with a new story because he knew we'd have welcoming ears. And he did tell the same stories over and over, but I didn't mind. They just got better each time. And he actually had a broken back. He had dove in at the bluff, and he broke his back, and he had implants planting in them. So he kind of like walked like Frankenstein. He was very stiff. He really couldn't turn his head too much, but he didn't let that stop him. Both of these guys were good old guys, and they were in their 70s or even early 80s. And I would talk to them. But in this place, they were there, and I would sit there and we'd watch the sunset every day. We never said a word, and we'd watch the sunset. And when I say day, I mean that very loosely, is that it wasn't like it was a day, is that I was just presented with this scene over and over again where I would see the sunset with these gentlemen. And that went on so many times. And eventually, I began to realize something that just changed everything. That both Joey and Johnny had passed earlier that year. John died of an infection in his leg from the diabetes, and Joe was hit by a car. I imagine he couldn't turn to see the car, and that was shocking to me. That was shocking to me because that up until this point, even though all these strange things were happening, it just didn't occur to me that I was someplace else. I know that's hard to understand, but I was just so caught up in what was going on is that this is the first time I realized, like, wow, I'm not in Kansas anymore. Something is strange. They can't be here. They're both dead. And so I wanted to ask them why they were here. But for some reason, I just couldn't do it. I didn't want to do it. I just didn't know. And each time we would watch the sunset together, it would get more intense and intense. Like, I want to ask them. I want to ask them. And then one time, a feeling got so intense that if I didn't ask them this time, I would never have another opportunity. At least that's what I felt. So finally, I made it known. It's not like I used words, but I made it known that I wanted to know why they were here. And they told me they were here to make sure that I was all right. That I was all right. Like I didn't know what they meant because nothing was wrong with me. I felt fine. I didn't remember an accident. It was just like echoing in my mind. And then as I'm sitting there, is that I saw the sun when it started to set, instead of getting dimmer, it just got brighter and brighter and brighter. And I just shielded my eyes because I couldn't stand it. And then when I felt it was okay to open my eyes, I opened my eyes and I was in a hospital room and my mother was holding my hand and she was telling me that everything would be okay, that I've been in a terrible accident, but everything will be okay. And that was my trip to the place between here and there, is that it was only a month on the outside, but on the inside where I was, it was lifetimes. I spent much more time there than I felt in my regular life. And, but I was still profoundly ill. I was intubated and I couldn't move and I was tied down. And, it was the first time I was tied down with my clothes on before. But it was just, I didn't know what was going on. And I got to look at things. I saw people coming and going, and I saw the nurse who was caring for me, very caring lady. I owe her so much. And finally they took the intubation out and I got my cell phone. And it was then I realized that I knew who that lady was in that other place. I did, because I could feel the energy and I knew the energy right away. It was my friend Kathy. This is a lady who I knew from Kings Park. I first met her when we were walking dogs, and we walk our dogs every day. I saw this lady for like every day for like 10 years. Never laid a hand on her. She was good. We talked about really intense things about life and about our relationships in life and everything else. I used to call her Saint Kathy because she was really into saints and things like that. And you know, but now I knew it was her. I really did. I really felt that. So the first things I did is I texted her and I said, "Thank you for visiting me when you're out, if you know what I mean." And she texted me back. She says, "Oh, you know?" And I told her I'd been to another place and you were there with me. I heard your prayers. And it's so true, because what this lady did is that every day she organized a prayer session with all of the people in Kings Park. She ran these things on Facebook where people were just sending me prayers, and she would give daily updates. And this went on for a month. And it was just, I felt that. I truly felt that, every bit of it. But I thought she was physically there with me. I didn't realize that she didn't visit me in the hospitals, all through the spiritual connection. And but I wanted to get better. I really did. And I, even in the rehab, I was in rehab for like another month after that. And I would walk around rehab in my stroller and my walker, and they would tell me to get back in bed. But I felt that I wanted to get better, and I was certain that if I did these things, I would get better. There wasn't a doubt in my mind that I was going to walk again and I was going to be back to my regular self if I just did this. And that's what I realized when Joey and Johnny told me that they were there to make sure that I was okay. They didn't mean there, they meant here, that they were going to be my spirit guides, not my spirit shields to prevent me from pain or anguish, but to help me through it. And Joey, his back was broken. My back was broken. Johnny, his leg, it was all infected, and that's how he lost his life. It went septic, and my leg was crushed. Who better would be there to be my spirit guides? And it wasn't like they whispered in my ear, like, one more push-up, Steve, or anything like that. It was that's where I got that surety from. It was that grace that I felt between myself and my higher self, is that it wasn't words. It was that I felt this energy. I knew if I did this, everything would be okay and I would get better. And Kathy, she was great. Kathy is an athlete, and she punches like a man, by the way. I mean, she's tough, and she's halfway between she's halfway between Sergeant Slaughter and Mother Teresa. You know, she would really push me. We'd walk the dogs, and I would hobble along, and she would drag me, and she'd really push me, and that's the way it went for a while. And sometimes I would talk about the place between here and there, but I was convinced it was the drugs. Like, it was all like Stevie has an active imagination, and I would tell her things about it, and I'd laugh at it afterwards, and she wouldn't laugh. She would like look at me with serious eyes, and I was like, I know, you know, it's funny, but she didn't get the joke, and so what happened is my cousin went to see a medium to connect with her grandmother who had passed. Excuse me. I jumped ahead of myself. And so that's the way it went for a while. I just kept on getting better and better and better. And then one day I went into my basement, and I found my 20-year-old son dead from a drug overdose. And I don't know, I didn't know what to make of it. It was like, you know, being such an alt guy, motorcycle guy, Harley guy, and computer guy wasn't so funny now. And I put so much effort into being a father and being what I thought was a good father. I'd given up my business and everything just to be with my kids and to mentor them. And I felt I did a great job. And this happened so quickly. It wasn't like he had this long thing with drugs or anything. He was a Division I wrestler. He was the wrestling champion of New York State for his weight class. He was on a scholarship to a D1 school. He played the saxophone like Dizzy Gillespie played the horn. He played the guitar like Jimi Hendrix. He played the piano like Rachmaninoff. He was great. He did all these wonderful things. And I thought to myself, what a waste. It was just so heartbreaking. And it was very difficult. And that's when Kathy was there for me, really, because as we would start to walk, I would start talking about things. And I would start talking about things. And then I would start to talk about the place between here and there. And she would look at me and she would say, come on, Steve, that's not your imagination. Those things really happen. There's a purpose to that. And you have to figure out what the purpose is, because it's going to help you get through this. And then she said, did my son ever tried to contact me? And I really got upset with that, because I'm sitting here dealing with this grief, and she's talking to me about the spiritual mumbo jumbo. And I don't know, but she was a dear friend. So I just kind of like nodded and went along with it. And then my cousin went to a medium, and and she to reach out and to get connect with her grandmother. And the medium said, there's a Nick trying to get through. Do you want to let him get through? And she said, of course. And so the medium went on and told her all these things about my son, which there's no way she could have known. At least I thought at the time. And that she says that my son had a connection with Mother Teresa, the little flower. And it's a saint, a Catholic saint. And that she asked if we had been seeing flowers, roses around. And gosh darn it, we had. We were hiking on a trail. We would see a rose here. We would see a rose in the most oddest of places. And Kathy would say, see, someone's reaching out to you, and I knew who that someone was because she's always pushing it, she's always pushing it. And that I knew who that someone was, but I wasn't going to buy into it. And now that my cousin is telling us this, that Nick has a connection with Mother Teresa and we're seeing these flowers, that really put Kathy in high gear. She made it a mission to really see if she could get through what she considered my thick head. And then about a year after, she brought a mass card, and we were going to make a tribute to my son. And what had happened is that she brought a pen, like a magic marker, and a whole load of flat stones, and she brought a little statue of Teresa, Saint Teresa, and we found this tree. It was right next to a babbling brook where we would hike. It was something out of Central Casting, and she put the stone there, and she wrote a little prayer to Nick on it. And so I wrote some prayers too, and we put flowers. We collected flowers from the nearby woods. We put it there, and then we came back a week later, and there were, I don't know, like 50 stones there, all with prayers on it. Like everyone who walked by wrote a prayer on it. I need a job, or my aunt is sick, or my wife, blah, blah, blah. All these different prayers on it. And they left it there. Saint Teresa and was still there. I thought someone would steal it, but no. And part of me thought that, everyone has problems, and I could have taken the negative on that. But really what I began to understand is that we're all in this together. We're all here experiencing life, and we all have these trials and pains and happiness and all these things. We're here to help each other. It kind of reminded me of the Sting song, Message in a Bottle, where he puts a message in a bottle and casts it out into the ocean, and he expected an answer, but instead he got 10,000 bottles back with problems. And that was the first time that I really began to heal, that I began to understand, that I was starting to feel that energy that I felt in that place from everyone around me. And all those stones, they took on an energy, that same energy that I felt in that other place. And then Kathy, she had her mass card with her. And we take a look at the mass card, and we're going to place it with Saint Teresa. And Saint Teresa's birthday was the very same day as my son's birthday. The day she was canonized, the day she was made a saint in the Catholic Church, was the very same day my son passed. And then I thought about what the medium said about a connection with Saint Teresa, and how did both of these things happen? That same birthday, and then same, canonization day, and that link with my son. It seems too real, and too I'm a computer guy. I know statistics. That's so obscure that to happen just by accident. And so I went home that night, and I had a dream. I had a dream that none of this happened, that everything was okay. And even some of the problems we had before he passed was all gone now. And then I woke up, and I realized that it wasn't, that these things did happen, but I didn't feel bad about it anymore. I started to feel relief, and I started to understand that truly that my son is happy, and that he's in that place between here and there, and he's experiencing some of those same things that I was experiencing. except for he won't be coming back in this life. But I will see him again. But I'll see him the way I saw Kathy or myself in that other place, as our higher selves. And that just brought me peace. I mean, it really truly did. It helped me to understand everything that had happened to me and Nick and just our family and everything. It's like it brought things into perspective, that knowing about the place between here and there and all those things, like things would be okay. And it's not like it was a switch, like all of a sudden everything, like I still have my good days and bad days, but wow, it really helped put things into perspective for me.
Incredible. Incredible. I love how you were able to marry some of the lessons from the NDE into the experience with your son. It's pretty incredible. Um, I want to go back to your coma. So interesting, Steve. I've talked to a handful of people who had coma NDEs. And their NDEs are markedly different than the NDEs of the other, people who just have an experience that's much shorter, especially when they're in a coma for a long amount of time. I think there's like 4 or 5 of you that I can think of, and you all have a similar thread that runs through that experience, which is you process information that almost seems disjointed in some ways, but it's not. And it's not a dream. It's not a dream-like state, even though sometimes they'll have aspects that are different from each other, like the life review is different than your conversations. But what is so interesting is that nobody has a dream and comes out of their dream and changes everything about their life and how they think about things and process them. So to me, these are absolutely real because of how you responded after it happened. So one of the questions I want to ask about is that you felt like time was super, super different and things would go faster when you would understand things versus when you were trying to absorb them, almost like the universe is mirroring your education level. And I know you've had a lot of time to think about this. Why do you think it happened that way? What was really going on that the experience had that kind of an aspect to it? It's very different than what you normally hear.
Well, I think it has to do with with just the learning process, is that no one's there telling you you're supposed to learn and you don't know you're experiencing like a lesson or anything. Is that so at first you just don't get it. You don't know what the rules are, you don't know what's going on. But as you begin to get it, you learn very fast. Once you know what's going on, you know the topic, or you kind of get what's going on. It happens so fast after that. It's kind of like AI in a way, that AI at first, it takes a long time for it to get it, but once it gets it quickly. It's I think that's the way. I guess it all gets back to the creator and the creation are one, is that, as we are walking through our path as humans and about this experience, we will discover that we are the creator. Picture where we are now with technology and gene editing and AI and all these things. Where are we going to be 1,000 years from now? You just don't know. And what I think is that we're walking down this path. And so the fact that my experiences mirrors these other things, now it's not surprising to me, but it just makes sense, because as you learn and grow, you have more information and then you get things a lot quicker. Even like if you think about yourself in school, I'm not getting it. Oh, now I got it. It was like that. A lot of things were like that in that other place.
So what was interesting as you were learning was that you said that the guy who would morph into different aspects of himself, you said he was trying to trick you in all kinds of ways. What did you mean by that?
Well, because like at first I didn't get the game. The game was so I had to guess
Oh,
who he was.
okay.
And so I didn't understand it at first, as that so he just tried to, and he did it better and better and better each time. He got more difficult to guess who he was. And each time I would guess it, he would say, "Oh, you got me, you got me," and and that was how I learned. It wasn't that he said, we're going to play this game. It just started happening. And I just started to recognize him over and over again. And I can't help but smile when I think about this experience, because like some of the experiences there were very tough for me, but I really enjoyed this part because I learned so many things. And that's kind of like the way it was, is that he was trying to trick me, but really he was teaching me.
What was the big underlying lesson that he wanted you to understand from him morphing into all those different characters?
He wanted to teach me how to sense spirit, that everything had a spirit and there was a commonness about it that we all shared, but it was something unique about each individual person. And so at first I just relied on the mannerisms or what I knew about him. But then after a while, I was able to begin very slowly at first to sense his spirit. Like I relied less and less on his mannerisms and more on his energy, like his aura, his, you can sense it. Even now, people didn't have this experience. They could feel people's energy. Some people are more in tune to it than others, but I was a zero on the spirituality scale, so we really had to start from zero. But yes, it was truly, he was there to teach me how to sense spirit. And once I sensed spirit, then I came to all these other realization. But without the ability to sense spirit, my life review would have been a lot less. I would have learned a lot, at least I believe I would have learned a lot less. That was very critical. The ability to sense spirit in everybody and everything gave every situation a new context.
Interesting. So here you are on the other side, learning this super important lesson about feeling energy. And you knew that it was something you needed to know, but there wasn't one kind of energy. There was an energy signature for a person, but there was also an energy signature that belonged to the collective. So for people who have not had an experience on the other side, what would you tell them about how they could connect to this ability themselves better?
Well, I could give you, because I've had this experience and I was a zero before having this experience. Um, uh, a lot of it would just be conjecture on my part. But what I would say is that meditation, that is definitely the key, I believe. Is that right now, as I lead a gathering once a week, I call it mantras, meditations, and good vibrations, where I play a gong and I play these bowls. And there's something to do about the vibe and the energy, the physical. A recording doesn't work. There's something about that gong. I have the 6 foot gong that I play for about an hour, and people tell me they connect with themselves. They feel the energy. Like a lot of times, people experience this mind chatter, like the mind's going a million miles an hour. And what this gong meditation does is something about the wave. It clears that mind chatter that enables you to really, if you ever, if you weren't able to meditate because you kept on thinking things, this kind of like clears it. And so I would say my first advice would be to meditate, but really, if you can, to get into live gong and the bowls, the crystal bowls. I play those as well. And that will start you along the path. It's a long path. Like no one could tell you one word for you to figure it out. You have to figure it out on your own, the way I did. But I may not be able to tell you all the signposts along the way, but meditation where you can clear your mind, that would be the first step.
Okay, that's super helpful. So you experienced something that I also experienced on the other side that I know to be truth. I was also, it was understood by me because it wasn't like I was shown or I was told, but it was understood by me that the amount of my higher self that is in my current Laurie incarnation would be the equivalent to my pinky fingernail because the soul is so magnificently powerful. It doesn't take very much to come in here. And I love the hand gestures you're making right now. It doesn't take very much to come in to animate the human experience. So I love that you said there's always a part of you that's in spirit and then the smaller part of you. So I would love if you wanted to elaborate or say anything more about that.
Well, what I would say is that you couldn't come. I say come down, but you couldn't experience human experience with all of your wisdom and understanding that you have as your higher self, because you've had the benefit of many incarnations and the lessons that you learned. Like I shared, is that I believe many of those lessons are your intuition, the things you inherently know, and because that only a small part of you can come down, because you'd have too much wisdom and too much knowledge. You have to be able to make those mistakes. And then I believe that once you start to learn and you grow, I believe that people believe in this thing called the Akashic record, the consciousness of the creation, of the creator. And as you begin to learn through these experience, millions of people, gazillion people, that actually the consciousness of the creation and the creator is actually expanded. All of us share the same spirit. I believe it's the Holy Spirit. Something it's a little different than what I learned in catechism in Catholic school, but truly, when they speak of the Holy Spirit, I believe it's that connection that we all share, and that we're all responsible to grow and to learn and to share with and to improve the consciousness of the creation. So yes, when you experience human carnation, only part of you can experience that, because if you had all the wisdom, you wouldn't be able to make those mistakes that enable you to learn from your life experience. And that's what I believe. I could be wrong, but that's really what I felt.
Beautiful. Well, I also super appreciated when you recognized that you were standing in front of your higher self. I know for people who haven't had experiences like you have, this is really hard for people to grasp that there would be a Steve incarnate and a higher self that you would stand in front of. But what have you come to understand about the higher self? Is a higher self guiding you also during your life incarnation?
I don't think so. I don't think so, because that you have to learn, you have to experience these things. I believe that perhaps the way Joey and Johnny, they were spirit guides for me, but once you're incarnated, I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe you have to be separated, because that if your higher self is giving you wisdom, it's kind of like defeating the purpose of why you're experiencing life, is to make mistakes and learn, and you only have a portion of your wisdom with you in order to make those mistakes and to learn. So I would think not, and I never feel that. I could always, when I say my higher self, it's like I always feel an energy greater than myself, and sometimes I'll have visions of perhaps past existences or past things, like I'll know something about something that I shouldn't know about, and everyone experiences these things. But do I feel like my higher self is like a spirit guide? No, I think that's a task for other spirits.
Okay, no, that makes complete sense. Do you know what I've been obsessed with life reviews, and do you know what I liked about yours so much? Two things. You're one of the only people I've ever talked to at a life review where you reviewed it again and again and improved on it and again. But your assessment at the end of it was so beautiful, because this is something that people grapple with, and I see it in the comments all the time. You said that you actually felt excited when you were getting things wrong, because it was an experience that allowed you to grow and evolve. And people are always getting upset about these things that happen to them instead of thinking of them as things that happen for them. So I would love for you to speak to that a little bit more.
Well, I'd like to. There's this spiritual teaching called the Japji Sahib, and it's a so excuse me, and I feel a connection to it. And I learned about this in yoga. It's the writings of this gentleman who's known to history as Guru Nanak, and as part of that, the whole thing goes Ekon Kar Satanam Karata Purik Nirvo Nirver Akal Murat Ajuni Sapong Guru Prasad Jap Ad Such Jugad Such Habe Such Nanakahosi Be Such. And a critical part of that is a second line. And what that means is that it means your awareness grows through your experiences. So don't have hate or animosity towards those people who bring you bad experiences. And it was things like that that really reached out to me. And I later learned that this Guru Nanak, he actually had a near death experience. He drowned and was gone for 3 days. And when he came back and he was okay, everything changed about his writings. And that's really the key from what I've learned in my life is that I don't feel shame or regret towards anything. I know it's kind of like a free pass. I look back at things that had happened to me in my life, things I'd done that I would have been ashamed of, or even mistakes I made. And I'm okay. It doesn't bother me at all now. But it doesn't bother me when people do bad things to me. I don't let it happen, I don't, because I want the experience. No, no, that's wrong. But as things happen, I deal with it and I learn and grow from it. And you paid the fee, you might as well get the wisdom. And that's really what I've learned that really helps me in my life every day is that shame and regret towards yourself is like the worst mental blockages you can have because it really prevents you from learning. You have to be able to shed those things in order to learn from your experiences. That's what I learned in my life review is that as long as I had shame or regret or hatred or animosity towards others, that I couldn't get through it because that would distract me. That would take me down the wrong path, is that I had to be free from that. And so when if I make a mistake, I do something bad, I apologize, I'm sorry and that kind of stuff. But the social aspect, but in my heart, I'm okay, as I don't feel shame or regret about it. Some things are more difficult than others, but like even something as simple as forgiving that guy who sold the drugs to my son. I didn't do it because of virtue, because I'm a virtuous person. I'm not. I was a biker, I'm a pleasure maximizing unit. No, I did it because I could do nothing else, because I understood things in a certain way. And that's really that's so important, is that truly is that you have to be able to go through life without shame or regret or hate or animosity to actually learn what you need to learn, and then you'll receive that bliss.
Yeah, that's so important. That makes so much sense. Was there anything that you can share with us since you did a closer to a million than to one life reviews of your life review? Was there something that really stood out that you were really surprised by? Like maybe something that you relived that you can remember and share with us that you hadn't thought of, and you had this life review and it's like a more of a central part that you're like, wow, I really didn't get that.
Sometimes very little things that if I'll share it, but it'll mean nothing to you. It'll mean nothing to you. But this was the thing that really got me, that really understood that was going on. I talked about a dog bite, and that was really part of my life review that I remember. I remember when I was a little kid delivering papers, earning money for my motorcycle, is that this big dog came running around the corner and bit me in the back, in my back. I still have the scar from it, and I was so frightened and upset by it. And and as I'm going through my life review, I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking like, why why aren't I afraid of dogs? Well, it was because that later on in life, I learned more about dogs, and actually I love dogs. And it was that I was able to cast away the way I felt at that time as a 7-year-old kid to what I am now as a person. And that's what really got it to me. That's how I learned that so many things you happen in your life, that the core of who you are and what you believe happened when those events happened. And it was because I was able to, before my life review, to be able to review this in my life and understand the difference between a bad dog and a good dog, that enabled me to grow from it. And that was monumental. Even though it's such a small little thing, that was the light switch that helped me understand that I had to let go of those things, all those fears and anxieties, and really start to let go of those, and to be able to understand the experience and why I was experiencing that. So that was something that was monumental for me at that time.
You said that wasn't going to have any meaning to us, and I have to disagree. You're the second person, Steve, this week that said that in almost the exact same way. The person who I interviewed last night said the same thing. When she processed these events, she realized that she could either turn them into something that would have tortured her forever, or she could have mitigated that energy and turned it into something positive in another way. And you just said it again. And I think the reason that these conversations are so valuable is a lot of times we're not saying things that we haven't already heard, but you never know how that's going to hit somebody a little bit differently. And they go, oh my gosh, I get it.
And if not now, maybe you plant a seed for later on when they
Absolutely.
look back at it. No, that's very true.
Yeah. So I want to ask you something about the prayers because that was a central part. I mean, how cool for you as an evidential evidence that this was something more real is that she didn't come physically to the hospital and sit by your bedside and hold your hand and pray. She's doing all this organization. So, what do you want people to know about the power of prayer that you understand after this experience?
Well, see, I never understood prayer. I thought it was all bullshit. I really did. Because I
Steve, I
just
love you. You were hilarious.
thank you. But I just never understood the prayer, and that was a good lesson that I learned. Is that first off, if somebody's sick, you know, if you pray for them, I believe that you can provide them with that healing energy that I received. I mean, I really do. And I don't think the words matter. Like I didn't hear the words. It was the feeling,
Energy.
the sincerity, the energy behind the words. So if somebody's sick, you hold their hand, you hold your hand, and it really makes a difference. I could tell you a very interesting story
Go for it.
that um, I was when I was preparing to tell the story for the first time, is that it was at a yoga studio, and I was doing it for a fundraiser for a lady who was like 90 years old who wanted to go to a yoga festival. She didn't have any money, so I talked to Kathy, my friend Kathy, and she said you should tell your story and we could charge people and we could give it to her. And so I thought, okay, I might as well tell the story. And 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 there was a lady who had called me up, sent me email, and she had told me, her son had passed, and so she knew about me. We lived in the same town, and she wanted to talk to me, but I just wasn't ready to talk to her, and I felt bad about that. But as dumb luck would have it, is that she wound up being the coach, a hockey coach for my future son-in-law, and and uh, and when my future son-in-law told me her name, I knew exactly who it was. And so I said, "Why don't you tell her to come to my my discussion tonight? She might get something out of it." And so that was it. And next thing as I know is I get this phone call from this lady, and she says, "Hello, is this Steve Weber?" And I said, "Yes." Is this her name was Barbara? I said, "Is this Barbara?" And she said, "Yes." She said, "How do you know it was me?" And I said, "Of course. I remember sitting at the hockey games with you, and we'd watch the games, and you'd tell me all about your life. It was so I really enjoyed it. She was a hockey coach. She actually coached the Rangers, how to skate. She was a skater. So instead of just going after the puck, she taught them how to skate and really made a difference. And they actually won the Stanley Cup. She is not in the Hall of Fame, but she's been up for a vote several times. And and you know it's just she's just exceptional individual, and she would tell me all these stories, and I said that was so fantastic. I really enjoyed our discussions, and that's why I remember your voice. And she said, "Oh." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "But I don't remember the circumstances under which we were watching a hockey game, so I don't remember." And she said to me, we never watched a hockey game." I was like, "What?" She says, "No, we never. In fact, I've never seen you like the way you are now." And I said, "Oh?" And she said, "When you were in the hospital, my son was in the next room to you. And when I would leave, I would come by in your room and I would hold your hand and I would say Hail Mary, and then I would talk to you about my life. How does that happen?
Because everything's divinely orchestrated. Like, wow.
And it's so true. Is that really? I was certain we watched the hockey games together, and
That's
and she wound
amazing.
up Kim. I mean, she's a wonderful lady. She's had a lot of trials and tribulations and health issues in life, but that really taught me a lot. That experience is so important for you to be able to connect with people in the here and now, and in the hereafter. You have that ability, and everyone does. And she never had a near-death experience. All she had was love in her heart.
Well, I want to also say how sorry I am for the loss of your son, how that all happened, and everything you had to go through. I do want to ask a question because this is super close to my heart. I wrote a book about signs and synchronicities, and I
Mhm.
receive them a lot from passed away loved ones. And I know that Kathy asked you that early on. We're
Mhm.
way past that now. Have you had some signs and synchronicities from your son since then?
Yes. Let me explain.
Okay.
Um, Let me see. Here's my opportunity for a shameless promotional plug.
Okay,
This is
perfect.
this is a book, The Place Between Here and There. And Kathy and I wrote this book together. And we wrote this during the pandemic. And we would go for a walk on the beach that was just about it's in our hometown, and we would walk along the beach, and we'd talk about the book and what we wanted to say. And Kathy would collect beach glass. That's glass that like washes up on the shore. And so at the time, Saint Kathy was praying to Saint Germain. They call him the Violet Flame. And um, and uh, so she was praying for the earth to be healed through this pandemic. So first off, if it wasn't for Kathy, things would have been a lot worse. but 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 what she wanted to see a sign from Saint Germain that he's hearing her prayers, and so she asked to find violet beach glass on the beach. On Long Island, you will find hen's teeth before you find violet beach glass. It just doesn't exist. There's just no way. And I knew she wasn't going to find it. But we walked for like an hour there and an hour back. She found plenty of beach glass, but not the violet beach glass. And I could see she was getting her pouty face on, and that I knew she was going to be upset by it. And I was just trying to think of some inspirational word to say to her. And um, and uh, so just then, as we're getting ready almost to the parking lot, this Dalmatian puppy, the white dog with the black spots on it, comes running from behind the sand dunes and starts jumping all over us. And I love dogs, especially puppies. And I'm pushing its head around, and the lady who owned the dog comes running from behind the sand. She's probably taking a pee or something. Comes running behind the sand dune and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." We're like, "No, don't worry. Kathy loves dogs too. We were playing with it. It's such a puppy, and we loved it, and we're just carrying on with it." And so we start chatting, chatty catties. She really chats a lot, and so finally she asks the lady, "What's the dog's name?" Violet. The dog's name is Violet.
Of
So
course
so
it was.
so Kathy and I start walking away, and her pouty face is coming back. I'm like, "Kathy, the dog's name is Violet." She says, "I know." I said, "Kathy, the dog's name is Violet." And then finally she got it, and she was like, "Oh wow." And I was like, "No, no, no. We have to find out more. That just doesn't happen. We just don't meet a dog named Violet." And so walking along the beach a few weeks later, and we see the lady and her dog, and it comes right up to us, and the dog starts jumping all over us, and we say hello. A very nice lady. We had a lot in common with her. And so we ask her, "How does a white dog with black spots become Violet?" And she said, "Well, her son and their favorite movie was Gone with the Wind. And there's one point where Scarlett O'Hara is wearing a violet dress that Brett Butler gave her. And they just loved the movie. So she decided to name the dog Violet, but she spelt the word violet the way Scarlet spells her name. Scarlet, I forget the spelling, but it wasn't the way the colors spelled. And she told me that she lost her son, and under perhaps similar circumstances, and this was like her way of dealing with it. And we became very good friends with her. She exercised the way we exercise. I gave her weights and things like that, and I really, I thought I was okay with everything, but I really wasn't, because as I began to talk to her, I never talked to anyone who like lost his son, a child, like I did, and we talked a lot, and I really began to understand things, and and I think to myself, how does that happen? How does that happen? Like, I'm when I look back on it, is I think to myself, no, it was her son and my son. It was her son and my son bringing us together to be able to
Million
deal
percent.
with this. And
Yeah.
and so it wasn't like my son whispers in my ear or anything like that, or I see a butterfly, but it was this that brought us together, and I'm certain it was our children who brought us together. And so if I were to give someone a word of advice, when you start to see signs of synchronicities, try not to get all excited, say, oh, that's a message from grandma, and like, because it kind of like blurs it, makes it go away. It's like you have to try to understand why you're seeing this message, like accept that you're going to be able to feel messages from past loved ones and lost loved ones, but you got to find the message, because what I've found since then is when I receive what I believe messages and I begin to understand it, is that I'll see another message a little later on that takes me one step further down the path. And it's that is that almost like signposts along the way to help you to receive important messages that help you understand things. It's not magic that makes things go away, but in the same way, like Joey and Johnny brought me that grace, these messages from lost loved ones or even spirit guides that enabled you to understand things, so you could figure things out or deal things out with yourself. And so these messages, the signs and synchronicities, like even my son with Saint Teresa's birthday and canonization days, all these things are affirmations that really help you understanding life and the reasons why we're here and the things you have to deal with. So yes, signs and synchronicities, and just keep an eye out and feel the message.
Beautiful. Love that. That's so helpful. I'm glad you shared that. Well, I would imagine that there are people who are watching right now who would love to connect with you. I would also love to hear from everybody in the comments. What really touched you about Steve's experience? Was it his coma experiences, his life review? Was it all of the understanding about the prayers, or maybe his connection with his son after he lost his son? And even if you've just gotten this far and you just write, waking up the collective, that all helps. But Steve, why don't you tell everybody how they can work with you and how they can find your book?
Well, my book's available on Amazon. Just type in The Place Between Here and There, and it'll come up. It's in English and in Spanish. It's also on audio as well, Audible, and then I'm available on YouTube. And but if you ever want to send me a message, my email address is steve@betweenhereandthere.org. So it's Steve at between spelled out here and there.org. And just send me a message. I try to answer any messages that I receive. And Kathy, Kathy lives in New York, and I live here in Florida, beautiful Florida. I love it. I lead this gathering every week called Mantras, Meditations, and Good Vibrations. I don't charge anything; it's for free. And sometimes I get as much as 100 people there, and I play my gong and I play the bowls. Sometimes I play a guitar, or I have a harmonium. Sometimes I have a flute, and I just really I could see that I love when people experience it for the first time, and their mind starts to get cleared out, and they feel at peace. And those things are things that I just cherish so much, these experiences. And so I definitely share it, and I receive a lot of appreciation, but I feel I feel that I appreciate them so much.
Well, Steve, I want to ask you one last question, which is after all these experiences, all the integration, what do you think one thing that you know for sure?
Life is good and people are good, even when terrible things happen. These are just words, but if you learn them for yourself and you take them into your heart, you'll find peace and bliss in this world and any other world which may come afterwards. That I can guarantee.
So helpful. Well, Steve, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for your vulnerability. I know that you were brought near tears a couple of times in retelling this. I know it takes a lot to share this. Thank you for your vulnerability. Most of all, thank you for what you are doing to help wake up the collective. It is so needed right now.
Well, I tell you, I receive as much energy as I give out, even more. So thank you very much.
Yes. Well, and of course, this show is absolutely nothing without all of you who tune in to watch, to listen, and to share these beautiful experiences with somebody who needs them. And if you still have questions, you can join me for Wake Up Wednesdays live at 5 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Mountain, 7 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Eastern. Thank you, everybody, for watching.
Satnam, amen. Thank you.
Do you believe that love never dies and you want to hear stories that prove it? Well, hit the subscribe button. You belong here.